It's officially fall and you know what that means. The weather is getting colder, the leaves are changing color, and Forge FC are winning playoff matches. Forge are heading to another Canadian Premier League final, so to kick off this week's episode of High Press, we will take a look at how they got there and how the rest of the playoff picture is shaping up.
To kick off the Canadian Premier League playoffs, York United traveled to Pacific to play in the 4v5 qualifier, but in the end, Pacific prevailed 1-0 with a 91st minute Adonijah Reid winner. Although Paris G on York nearly provided us with the moment of the season with the 95th minute bicycle kick equalizing goal. Incredible goal. The only problem, it was rightfully ruled offside, and that allowed Pacific to move on to the next round.
As a reward for their efforts, Pacific had to travel across the country to play third place Halifax Wanderers, who hosted them in the quarterfinals less than 72 hours later. Despite playing a rested Wanderers side, however, Pacific prevailed with a 1-0 win thanks to Zachary Fernandez's own goal and some late defensive heroics.
Meanwhile, Cavalry hosted Forge in the 1v2 semifinal for a spot in the final as hosts. But despite being favorites, Cavalry ended up falling on the day as Forge does what Forge does in playoff games and nabbed a 2-1 win to qualify for their 5th straight final. As a result, Cavalry will now host Pacific in the other semifinal, while Forge will await the winner in that final.
Now that there are only 3 teams remaining in the playoffs, let's focus in on each of them, starting with, of course, Forge, who have made their 5th straight final, and they could become the first team to somehow win a final at home. This is what this club can do. They are big game players in big game moments, and we are going to focus in on Kyle Bekker, Big Game Bekker, as some like to call him. Alex, does he embody Forge's mentality when showing up for big moments like this?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, a club's identity sometimes only goes as far as, those at the top, be it a head coach or, maybe a manager or a player, a captain, a key player. Bekker, certainly, he ticks off a lot of those boxes. He's been the club's captain since day one. He's won an MVP award. He is clearly still their best player. He's up for an MVP award again this year. He's going to be in a lot of people's teams of the seasons for a reason. So he's obviously Forge's leader. So the fact that he showed up the way he did in a game like this, it's just what he does. I find it fascinating that in this Forge versus Cavalry fixture, there's been a lot of good strikers on both teams. There've been a lot of good attackers. You can go through the list of some of the guys who've played for both teams. Yet, who is the all-time leading scorer of Forge versus Cavalry? It's Kyle Bekker, and he added another one. What ended up being the winner, phenomenal goal. By the way, it must be said, the technique, the patience, and then the celebration at the end for a bit of banter. It's just what you want to see from your captain in those sorts of big moments, because sometimes big players can be tough to perform in these big games. You have the attention on you. Teams know what you can do. It's not like Kyle Bekker isn't a known commodity around the CPL. Teams want to mark him tightly. So the fact that he's always finding a way to score, get an assist, even he didn't get the assist on the first goal, but he put the ball in the great area. That's what Kyle Bekker does. And I think that it's no coincidence that Forge's players fall in line behind a leader like that.
He's definitely well known around the league, and Adam Jenkins, colleague of ours, called it out even before he scored, saying he's a big game player, and a little icing on the cake for Jenkins, who looked pretty smart in the booth. But if Forge do win this, Alex, it would be their 4th North Star Cup. Does that make them the undisputed best team in the Canadian Premier League history and cement a dynasty? Now, this answer may not be as easy as it seems.
For sure. I mean, it's no doubt that if they do it, they are, right? Like 4 playoff trophies in 5 years, having made the final every year. You finally win one at home, which is a big accomplishment. You become the first CPL team. You add in that they do have a regular season title as well to their name, so that's another trophy for the cabinet. I think it'd be no doubt, especially if you throw in bonuses like the CONCACAF League runs, making the Champions League, all the history they've set, no doubt. But for what it's worth, while Forge certainly still entering this year, they're still, I think, the best team in CPL history. It's worth noting that a few teams could challenge their crown, I think, over the next few weeks. And I think if Cavalry wins, for example, that would be their first playoff title. That's huge. They've already won 2 regular season titles. They finished first in another year where they didn't win. They tied Forge. So technically, it could be like they finished first 3 times. Plus, they would become the first team to win a double, which is a pretty big deal that no one's been able to win both the regular season and a playoff title. And Cavalry's been the best team in the regular season. And across the world, across Europe, across South America, league winners are recognized as the best team, teams that do well in the league moments. Cavalry would have that. And for Pacific, for example, if they do win this, it's worth noting that all of a sudden, that would be there's only been 4 full seasons of the league. Of course, shout out to the Island Games for providing us football during a tough time, and it was a great tournament. But if you're looking across 4 full seasons, if Pacific wins this year, they'll have won 2 of those. Plus, 2 of their last 3. If they beat Forge twice in their own stadium, Pacific could have an argument to be one of the best teams in CPL history. Basically, all to say, I think even if no matter what happens, Forge is still probably the best team in CPL history after this year, but I don't think it's as undisputed. You can have good arguments for if a Cavalry wins or if a Pacific wins.
In moments like this, I'd like to think of the fans, and I agree. I mean, if Forge win, and regardless, I do think that they are the team, but if they win, they've won 4 or 5. You can't really challenge that. But if they lose, I could just picture a Pacific fan saying, we beat you twice on your turf. That's a dispute up for debate for me. And then the Cavs as well, the double. Have you ever done a double? So I totally agree. But Alex, if you are Forge, out of those 2 matchups, which one do you think that they want?
It's a good question. I think Cavalry would be a fun one just because it's the rivalry, playing them in another final. All the big games they never disappoint. Forge can really rub it in as well that they're the bigger brother. But as we know, they also would have played them once in the playoff this year and won. And as we know, the second matchup between teams always seems to go to the favorite of the team that lost. So Forge might be wary of that. So I think they want Pacific just because, look, Pacific came in 2021. Forge, the only time Forge has otherwise hosted a game, a final at home with the chance to win was in 21. Pacific robbed them of that chance. So this is a chance to right that wrong. It's a chance to get revenge for that. And hey, there's some fun storylines. Alessandro Hojabopor and Taryn Campbell did trade Pacific for Forge after winning that Final Four moments like this. I'm sure they'd love to rub it into their old club. So I think there's a few reasons why Forge will want revenge on Pacific.
Honestly, though, at the end of the day, Forge don't really care who they're going to get in the final. They're going to back themselves to win no matter what. So the pressure is really on Cavalry, if I'm being completely honest. They were on a 5-match winning streak going into that game against Forge. They won 8 of their past 9. They dropped the ball, unfortunately, for the Cavs. They have a 0 wins, 1 draw, and 5 loss record in playoffs against Forge. And in the regular season, they have 6 wins, 5 draws, and 6 losses. So Alex, why is it that Forge seem to have Cavalry's number?
Yeah, it's fascinating just because especially they play each other so close. I think the fun stat as well is that they've played over 20 times. All but 2 games were decided by 1 goal. Like, it's not like there's been this huge disparity of, Forge blowing them out in the playoffs. It just seems to, when the screws get tighter, when the game seems to matter, Forge gets a number on Cavalry. And I guess that's a worry for Cavalry, just because, again, at the end of the day, like we mentioned in the last section, playoffs are where big game players step up. It's where, legends are made. This is where, on Forge's perspective, you have guys like David Chouanier, who he's just made a name out of scoring in big games. And for Cavalry, they need a moment like this. And I think there's record against Forge in the playoffs is emblematic of Cavalry getting it done in the regular season. They're the best team in the regular season by a good amount. Like, historically, they have that lead in the all-time table. But at the end of the day, what do you remember? You remember the playoffs. You remember the big games. Of course, it's special and it's important to win regular season trophies, and that's why I want to make sure to give Cavalry their due. But at the end of the day, especially North America, and to be fair, all over the world, knockout competitions mean a lot. There's a reason why the Champions League means a lot, FA Cups, etc. These knockout situations mean a lot, especially North America for the playoffs. So for Cavalry, it just shows that they're going to need some of their players to step up in these sorts of moments. That's the one big thing I think that stands out, is that it's hard to think back to defining performances from their individuals. And you use this season as an example: Dan Klump, MVP candidate; Marco Carducci, goalkeeper of the year candidate; Ali Musi, MVP candidate; Meyer Bevan won a golden boot. Of those 4 stepped up in this game, Musi was one where he almost willed his team back to a win, but Carducci, he probably wants the first one back. Bevan wasn't able to get on the score sheet. You're going to want those guys to step up the rest of the way.
To be honest, Alex, that 0-1-5 record against Forge in the playoffs I thought was a crazy stat, but somehow we dug up a crazier one on the Cavs, and it's the fact that they have yet to win a single or 2-leg knockout game in the Canadian Premier League playoffs. Is this upcoming game against Pacific era-defining for Tommy Wheeldon Jr. in this Cavs side?
It might just be, just because the same way that Forge has made their success in the playoffs, Cavalry needs that moment. At the end of the day, they need to show that they can go in these big games and win. And the fact that they've actually never, if you remove the Island Games pretty much, that's the single or 2-legged knockout differentiator, they've never won. The thing is, too, it's not as if they've won a game in a 2-legged tie. They've never even won a game within a 2-legged tie as well, just for further context to that stat, that's huge because playoffs, again, they mean a lot. These knockout games mean a lot. It's where, especially because it's so much pressure. It's on coaches, it's moments, it's decisions, it's, how you adjust. Opponents are giving you your best. That's the thing as well about playoffs. It's everyone's best. Sometimes in the regular season, you can be resting guys, you can be going through moments, etc. At the playoffs, it's the best. And for Cavalry, they really need to show that when it comes to this time of year that they can show up. So the specific game's huge. First off, because if you lose that, the fact that you go 5 years, you're finished first in the league 3 times, yet you never win a single playoff game of consequence like this, that's huge. And then even if they do win the specific game, you still have the pressure of never having won a playoff game against Forge, who is completely out of your number. So that's even more pressure. So that feels like these next 2 games are era defining, because if they go out and lose again, it's going to be hard for them to shed that label of a team that maybe underachieves in these biggest moments.
We have some deja vu for Pacific fans. If we rewind back to 2021, Pacific went to Calgary. They had to travel all that way for a semifinal that they won before going to Hamilton for the final and winning the North Star Cup. If they're going to do it again in 2023, the same scenario is going to happen. They're going to travel to Alberta for a semifinal, and if they win that, they go back to play Forge for a final. With the start that Pacific has had to playoffs right now, they're playing that playoff type feel right now. 2 cagey 1-0 wins. They're playing in that difficult 4-4-2. The pressing is incredible. The defensive tactics is incredible. Does it look like they could pull it off again, Alex?
Absolutely. I think Pacific has made it, to add to the points we've talked on already on this show, Pacific has shown that they can be a team that shows up in the big games. They proved it in 2021. Felt like not many expected them to just go at it the way they did, but they showed that they can handle the pressure. And I harken back to a quote earlier this year from James Merriman, which was kind of funny. He was in their slump and he was asking Merriman about the slump. And he's like, look, this team makes no sense to me, man. For whatever reason, we love to show up when our backs are against the wall, when the pressure is on us. And it doesn't get much harder than 2 away games against 2 of the best teams in league history to win a title. Yet, funnily enough, you look in their history, Pacific's already done that. That just shows that they love these sorts of moments. And I look to the way they're playing, like you mentioned, cagey. 2 clean sheets in the playoffs. That's hard to do, especially you got a 20-year-old goalkeeper in goal, but Gazdov stepped up. Everyone stepped up. That's just what it is. It's stepping up in these moments. And that's most impressive about Pacific, that they're getting contributions from across their roster, because sometimes in playoffs that happens. Like we mentioned, it's always impressive when stars show up in the playoffs, but it can also be tough because you might get double teams. Everyone knows who the matchups are, who the danger men are. So if you can have players to step up, that helps, and Pacific have had that.
This playoff run for Pacific will be a gauntlet. There's no getting around that. They went to Halifax. They are now going to Calgary, potentially having a final in Hamilton. 3 very difficult matchups. Not going to be easy, but this season has not been easy for them. They started off very strong. They looked like the team to beat. Things kind of fell apart. They ended up in 4th place, which was a little bit surprising. They experimented a lot with this team, Alex. I don't think James really knew exactly what his best 11 was throughout the season, but maybe that's a good thing. He's seen a lot of different players. He's been able to tweak things, use different starting 11s. Is that experimenting going to pay off now?
It feels like it, and I think it's interesting. Just there's countless examples. I'll try to touch on a few. Look in goal. Emil Gazdov had his struggles earlier in the year. Kieran Basket came in and did well, and of course Gazdov ended up getting a run to get his confidence back, helped for U21 minutes. But over the last few games, they could have gone back to Basket once they ticked off the U21 minutes. But, for example, the numbers show that Pacific have defended better when Gazdov's in goal. That's something they realized. You learn little things like that. You learn that someone like Kakuta Mane is showing that he's back up to full fitness. He's doing his thing. They're learning that, for example, in midfield, that some of their best defensive performances have come from a Sean Young dropping a little deeper, Manny Aparicio dropping in alongside him, like we've seen, like someone like Cedric Toussaint, who's been a solid 6 for them all year, moved to the bench. Maybe that combination of Young and Aparicio has just been something that's been really liked. And there's countless examples. Easton Ongaro's pressing, some of the center back options. For example, they might play back 5 in Cavalry maybe to try and stymie things. Well, it'll help that they know that Paul Amadume can slot right in because they gave him looks at the end of this season. So I think that Pacific is one of the deepest teams in the league. We've mentioned it all year, and it feels like they know. Heck, it's something like Eamon Salouf, 15 goal contributions, yet his best roles on the bench, and Pacific have figured that out over time, that he's best coming on against tired legs, as we've seen over the last course of games. So I think Pacific really knows what they have in this squad. And I think it's telling that they've been able to nail the game plan so well and adjust, because it's important to adjust in the playoffs. Sometimes you can get stuck in your way. I think it's telling that Pacific played 2 different formations, 2 different lineups, both playing that sort of grindy playoff style.
All right, Alex, to end off the episode, simple question. Who do you got to win this thing?
Boring answer. I'll start with Forge. They're in the final. That's something they want, to win a final at home, to become the first team, especially how the last time they hosted that final for a chance at a trophy against Pacific. They've won 3 out of 4 for a reason. I'm going to go Forge.
I'm going to go with Pacific. I'm a poetic man. The writing is on the wall for me because I've seen this script before. 2021, they're going to have to go to Alberta, do the exact same thing in the semifinals. The way that this playoff format changed to set up a one-off, I like it. I'm backing Pacific to do that and then go right back to Forge and win there again. That is all the time we have for in the latest edition of High Press. I really hope you all enjoyed this episode, and if you did, be sure to tune in for next week's update.